Welcome to everybody, and thank you for being here today for this SAC Special Interest Group panel discussion. So I'm Patrick Daly of Alba Consulting, and I'm here in Dublin in Ireland, and this is the first of a two-part event. And today we have panel members and also attendees from Europe and from North America. And the second part of the event will be held on March 18th next week, and that will be for panel members and participants from Pacific Rim. But if the timetable of that suits you, you can jump into that as well from here. So our topic today is supply chain partnerships, creating resilience in 2021. And a little bit of background before I introduce the panelists here. So the special interest group within the Society for the Advancement of Consulting was set up last year. And one of the first things that we did was we produced an ebook. And that ebook was titled Thriving in the New Business Environment, Why the Strategic Supply Chain Matters. And one of the key things that we touched on in that ebook was that over the last 40 or 50 years or so, we've seen business models transformed globally, internationally, around the world. And one of the key features of that transformation is that businesses transformed from being vertically integrated, whereby they exercised control and ownership of their supply chain, or control and competition in their supply chain through ownership. So they owned all the different stages in the supply chain. So you can think back to the example of the Ford Motor Company in the 1920s. They owned everything from forests and mines through to dealerships. Whereas that kind of model transformed over the years into a horizontal model. And the horizontal integration is whereby control and competition is exercised through relationships and partnerships with supply chain partners of all types. When I say partners in supply chain, I'm talking about in the widest context, and this is what we want to talk about today. So you're talking about suppliers, you're talking about service providers, you're talking about other types of intermediaries, non-governmental bodies, authorities of different types, customers, and even competitors. And so here we are in the 2020s, and COVID arrives. And what this is doing is it is highlighting the strength or the weaknesses of the supply chain relationships that we have. And companies now are looking for a strategic balance between efficiency and resiliency. And what we're seeing as a group is that it's the quality of these supply chain relationships with all of those players that we spoke about that make the difference, that are going to make the difference between those that survive and thrive and those that fall by the wayside. So to discuss this topic, both in the general sense and more specifically with regard to some specific items that we have prepared for you, I'm joined by the panel here, who I will introduce now. So we have Antonio Zrilic, and Antonio is the president of Logico Consultants in Zagreb in Croatia. Welcome, Antonio.
Oh, thank you.
Art Koch, he's the president of Arthur Koch Management Consulting in Miami, Florida. Hi, Arthur. Welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
And Elizabeth Warren, who is the president and CEO of Dialed In Partners in Los Angeles, California.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone.
Okay, there, and sitting there in the background looking after us is Lisa Anderson from Lisa Anderson Consulting, also in California. So some of the topics that we're going to look at today, apart from that general area, and I'll ask the guys to give us their general overview in a second, but some of the specific topics that we're going to look at is outsourcing versus insourcing, partnership categorization and segmentation, visibility and cooperation among supply chain partners, and the nearshoring versus offshoring rebalancing that's going on. So what I might just do is ask each of you guys, just in terms of the general overview of that transformation from vertical to horizontal, the arrival of COVID, where we are now, where you think we're headed. And I might just call on each of you to give us a couple of minutes, and then we'll go into a bit of to and fro on the various detailed topics. So I'll start with Art. Art Coach, what's your view?
I think COVID accelerated the movement. As we talked about earlier, supply chains across the world flattened out and they covered the globe, and we were shipping things halfway around the world to be assembled or manufactured. Prior to COVID, we'd already seen the shift to where we were pulling that in more regionally. And what I see happening with the onset of COVID and how people are thinking, I call it that we're becoming more regionally vertical, to where they're looking for suppliers and supplier partners within a region. And you could take different regions, you say European region, the Americas region, and the Asian region. Instead of shipping stuff from Asia to the United States or vice versa, we're looking at more regionally, more regional supply chains.
Okay, Elizabeth, what's your kind of overview, your general kind of comment of where we've come from, where we're at, and where we're headed to?
I could not agree more with Art about COVID accelerating everything, whether it's Zoom meetings or looking at your supply chains, your manufacturing processes, your sourcing. Certainly that has changed everything that we do. And I think that we've learned so many critical lessons during this pandemic. How are we going to make those supply chains more resilient? We thought we had backup plans, but when entire continents shut down, your backup plans kind of go out the window. So then how do we recover from that? And how do we anticipate, the next time? Because if it's not one thing, it's another. There will always be something that's going to cause those disruptions. So I think we're still at risk from the global instability. We've still got trade wars and tariffs. There's potential regulatory changes in Europe and the UK. So I think that business and the entire supply chain really must be ready for future shocks. And how are we going to prepare for that? So that's something that hopefully we can talk about during the rest of the panel.
Okay, just before I go to Antonio then for his overview, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions as we go through this, just type them in the Q&A box that's there on your screen, and Lisa hopefully will pick those up and relay them onto us during the panel discussion. So Antonio, what would be your kind of overview of where we've come from, where we are now, and where we're headed to?
I must say that I have a deja vu about all things that happened. Of course, I agree with all already said by Elizabeth and Art, but this, for example, insourcing, outsourcing, offshoring, reshoring, this discussion reminds me on some discussion that I had maybe 10 years ago. I even organized two conferences called Outsourcing Days, and in 2013 and 14, and that was a hot topic then, and this is hot topic now. It's only coming and going in waves, in cycles. It depends on some global or regional circumstances, and pandemic is one of these circumstances that accelerated, as Art said, this reversal of this movement in supply chains all over the world. So this is my I have a deja vu.
Okay. I guess as well, what we're seeing is there were factors in place already before COVID was heard of. So we had, say, Industry 4.0, and we had the advent of new manufacturing technologies like additive manufacture, 3D printing. We've got robotics, we've got the Internet of Things, We've got all of these things kind of coming together and slowly being integrated. And they, I think, were already driving a shift away from this looking for almost arbitrage of labor rates in faraway places, and then depending on very long supply lines, which, as we saw in Fukushima, as we saw with the Iceland eruption back a few years ago, as we saw with the trade tensions between the US and China, and then COVID and so on, we saw how challenging they could be at times. And anecdotally, client of mine here in Ireland, a manufacturing client in the pharmaceutical business, one of their very important APIs was coming from India. And they had traditionally held a strategic stock of this API here in Ireland, so maybe 6 months supply, something like that. But over the years, as nothing had happened, they had decided to reduce that strategic stock from months to weeks. And that was the situation when COVID descended upon us. And then all of a sudden, they're going, okay, the Indian government has put an export ban in place. We can't get any of this stuff out. We've only got X number of weeks here. If we don't do something really quickly, we're going to have to shut the plant down. So that kind of shock and fright has changed the thinking, accelerated the thinking of something that was already in place. And I was talking to somebody in Australia recently, and as you know, there's been tensions between Australia and China, and between the technological changes and all the other shocks that have come in place. And as well as that the labor rates in some of these countries like China and so on are not as low as they used to be, and they're rising as those countries develop and as people's ambitions increase for themselves and for their children and so on. So I think a lot of that is feeding into this rebalancing, yeah, that's currently what's ongoing and has been ongoing. And as you very well say, COVID was an accelerant to that. So I'm interested, Antonio, as well. You mentioned in a recent conversation with this group about how to classify relationships and partnerships, because not all relationships and partnerships are the same. And I guess people will have realized as the pressure came on during COVID, which ones are more important than others. And you mentioned this matrix by Peter Kraljic, who's the Slovenian director of the Dusseldorf office of McKinsey back in the day. So you might tell us a little bit about that. How does that schema work, and how might that be useful as a tool that we could apply to our own businesses?
Yeah, relationships in supply chains could be of a very different kind. And imagine, for example, 2x2 matrix, where on one axis there is the importance of purchasing, and on other axis is complexity of supply market. And and when you divide these segments in 4 segments, you get, for example, a segment with very low impact on purchasing and on companies' results, and low and very easy to buy things. So very simple stuff, and you don't need partnership. You don't need relationships with this kind of suppliers, for example, and we can build or use transactional relationship
it's kind of for commodity type products and services, maybe like paper clips and printer paper and stuff like that. Yeah.
This kind of stuff. You use automatic purchasing, and you use auction for procurement, and then you have a segment where there is a high impact on a company, but very easy to buy. There are a lot of suppliers. You have this negotiation leverage, and you can negotiate very good prices. And again, you don't need partnership, but you have you can use a negotiation relationship with leverage to these suppliers. Yeah, and then you have something that we call, or in this a matrix is called bottleneck. So you have a very low impact and very high complexity and very few suppliers. So you are what you want to do is to assure that you have delivery of these rare goods, and you need a contractual relationship. So you need contract that you will be safe with these goods. And then there is a fourth segment, and this is high impact and high complexity, and very difficult to procure these goods, these materials. And this is where you need partnership, alliances, and high level of partnership. So you have to optimize your partnership, so to speak, assets, so that you know where to use which kind of partnership. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, because it sounds like common sense, but it's amazing how that kind of schema often isn't applied. I had a conversation recently with a supply chain director of a multinational with a base here in Ireland, and they had a product where they extracted one ingredient from the product, and then for the product to have the same kind of taste or impact, they had to replace that ingredient that they took out with many different ingredients. And that meant lots of new SKUs to be managed and lots of new sources of supply and so on, and lots of new relationships to be managed. And the supply chain manager was very worried because he said, my supply chain team is limited. I'm not going to be able to cope with this explosion of relationships. I said, well, how do you manage them? Well, we said, we'll manage them all more or less the same. So he didn't have a schema like this, which I think would have been useful to say, listen, there are ones in here that are critical, and I need to put a lot of attention into those. But there are others where, you know, we can either set up something automatically, or we can manage them on an exceptions basis, or we can do something a bit more clever. I'd be interested, Art, Elizabeth, any comment from yourselves in relation to that kind of categorizing of relationships so that you're efficient, so that you're dealing with them in a strategic way, rather than trying to use one size fits all.
Elizabeth, you want to go first, or you want me to?
Sure. I was just going to say that, having visibility into that supply chain through technology would certainly play a key part in being able to manage those relationships. And as we get more and more connected through technology to all of our suppliers and our various stakeholders, I think that would probably help quite a bit. But do you have the bandwidth? Do you have the security in place? You know, there are a lot of pieces that need to go into that. But I think that having that technology there and certainly the pandemic and COVID has accelerated, as Art said originally, 5 to 7 years, they're saying that getting these processes into place. Technology's been around for a long time, working with supply chain, but certainly the pandemic has accelerated everyone's belief in that we need to be more connected.
I think it's changed people's idea of what can be achieved in certain timeframes. As you said, there were a lot of resources and tools available, but they weren't really being made use of. And now, because of necessity or obligation, people have started to use certain tools and say, okay, this actually works, and it's better than what came before. So Art, what was your own take on what Antonio was talking about?
Yeah, I really like the quadrant aspect, and I break it up similarly, but a little bit different. I break it up into the low-level items like hardware. When you take a look at fasteners and the commercial or the C-level or D-level parts, I like to work with my clients to pull in a company like Fastenal, Optimus, Worth to handle all that low-level parts. Because supply chain people are very much in demand. A few years right before the pandemic, the United States and much of Europe was at what I call the zero unemployment effect, where anybody wanting to work was working. And you look at supply chain procurement organizations, demand planning organizations, prior to that, stretched extremely thin. So I work with my clients to get somebody in to handle the hardware. Then one of the medium tier, when you look at Allen Bradley, Parker Hannifin, the electronics, the electromechanical switches that go on, and the pneumatics, partner with suppliers like them, or they have VARs that work closely with them, value-added retailers that can do a VMI into your business. And those are plug and play. It doesn't take a lot of technology from a manufacturing company to handle that kind of relationship. You get them plug and play. Then you take the organization and you say, okay, let's use our intellectual capital on working on our IP and controlling our IP to where we're not trying to outsource that. Prior to the pandemic, we had so many companies that outsourced their IP for other companies to manufacture. Instead of having that internal or having that at such a strategic partner that that partner is not going to walk away and steal the information. So I like to go about it from that standpoint and get, instead of looking at, I see companies, they say, oh, everybody needs to be a strategic partner. It doesn't work that way. You need to have 2, 3, 4 strategic partners. Do it really well with one, then replicate that model, improve upon it, and use these other, a Worth, a Fastenal, an Optimus to handle your hardware, then use these value-added 3PL kind of people for your pneumatics and your electronics.
Okay, maybe I'll stick with you, Art, because I know this topic is kind of dear to your heart, and we've had a few discussions on it, and we might have slightly different read on it in terms of nearshoring and offshoring. And I know that in the US, particularly in the political sense, over recent years, there was a lot of concern about that, jobs had been lost out of traditional industrial areas, and they had migrated either south in the US or they had migrated away from the US to Mexico or China or elsewhere. And then there was a counter argument that a lot of that loss was going to happen anyway, and it was more driven by technology than by anything else. But we've definitely seen a kind of rebalancing or nearshoring with manufacturing coming back. And I was kind of thinking of it not so much as a reversal, as a return to, say, the US of the 1950s, where there was a factory in every town and everybody who wanted a factory job could have one. I don't think that's coming back. It's more like a regionalization of supply chains within big geographic areas such as North America, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and so on. So what are you seeing? What's your take strategically? What are your clients thinking in this space?
What I'm seeing currently is my clients double downing on regional manufacturing. They're buying large scale pieces of capital equipment to where they can pull production in-house. They are also going and buying strategic suppliers. If you take
you mean they're acquiring them and vertically integrating them?
Exactly.
Like a back to the future type thing.
Kind of a back to the future. Yeah, exactly. So, I have a handful of mid-market private equity clients, and I follow what goes on. And within private equity, at the end of 2020, there was $1.5 trillion in what they call dry powder, money ready to invest. And they've been waiting for valuations to come down. Well, what happened is not necessarily valuations are all the way coming down. However, they're seeing the strategic need to integrate businesses. And they're not going and trying to integrate across the world. They're strategically looking at different industrial segments. And in talking with a couple people, we know that we're insourcing and nearshoring, but we also know that there's an extreme amount of pressure on labor cost, and it's going to rise. So they're working very diligently on operational excellence to ward off that cost. And at the same time, they're looking at how do we buy the right pieces of equipment, hire the right people, put in the right process improvements from, you take a demand planning tools to where you get better at your demand planning, your inventory optimization, your replenishment planning, to better lean principles, to getting the right people in the right seats. And you mentioned earlier, 3D additive printing. They're looking at this whole picture to where they can streamline their supply chain, increase the flexibility and the resilience of it, and ward off future inflationary costs by moving things regionally. Okay.
Okay, Elizabeth, any views on that aspect of the reconfiguration of supply chains from your point of view, or maybe implications for your industry? Because I guess you're very closely associated with ports in the United States, and I guess the ports have been beneficiaries of these very long supply chains and movements of large quantities of goods intercontinentally. So what's your perspective, or what's your take on this?
Well, when you say beneficiary of long supply chains, I think the ports they want to get that cargo in and out as fast as possible. Having containers sit at the terminal for weeks on end is really not something that they want. They're trying to get that cargo moved out because it's just causing a backup throughout the entire system. You guys, I'm sure you've heard, we've got 30 container ships sitting out in the harbor here in Los Angeles, and there's so many that they don't even have room for them at berth, not at berth, but at their designated parking spots in the harbor. They have them free floating out in the ocean because we have so many ships. Mm-hmm. So I think that trying to get the containers out of the port, get that cargo out of the warehouses, onto trucks, onto trains, get it out of the port is their main goal.
Okay, and I know you were involved in this idea, and this is it aligns with what we're talking about, the difficulty of getting visibility among the different partners. So you mentioned various partners there. So the people who unload, the people who maybe pick up, and but you've got the customs clearance, and you've got the transport companies, you've got the warehousing companies, and so on and so forth. So you were talking about some sort of initiative that's underway in the ports to try to get that kind of visibility and sharing. So what kind of challenges have there been? What kind of successes have there been? What kind of failures have there been?
There's a little bit of all of that. The Port of Los Angeles started in 2017 what they call their port optimizer. And every year they make progress on getting something else implemented, something else developed, and something else implemented. But I will tell you, in 2017, there was a lot of reluctance in order for people meaning stakeholders, companies, to be willing to share information, what they thought that they were sharing with others. Everyone only sees the information that they need to see, my understanding. I've read up on it and kind of keeping up with it over the years. There is not the holistic sharing of all information. You only see the part that you need to see in order for you to know what's happening with your cargo as it's coming in. But that helps you to plan, whether it's for chassis, whether it's for labor, whether it's for trucking, whether it's for warehouse space. If you know what's happening 48 hours in advance or 2 weeks in advance, you have much more ability, no matter if you're a beneficial cargo owner, no matter what part of the supply chain that you are in, you can plan better to manage those resources. So there is still some reluctance. Like I said, every year they're developing more and more modules. They just had an announcement a few weeks ago that now they have a trucking portal that's now open. So, and that certainly will help our trucking industry as well. But it's not just the Port of Los Angeles. There's also initiatives at Rotterdam. Rotterdam has made a lot of advancements with their digitalization. And I was just on a conference last week where I heard the CEO of the Port of Virginia on the East Coast, Stephen Edwards, talk about the Port of Virginia role as a data hub for managing that information and sharing that information. I think that the challenge is going to be is, as I step back and look at it from the bigger picture, is how are we going to share that information globally if every port or every region has their own information? The Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Virginia, Rotterdam, and others. Is there a common platform where all the ports can share the information? So if you're a BCO and you're shipping to multiple ports and you're shipping from all over the world to different places, how are you going to manage that information from a global perspective and not just from a port to port basis?
Okay, so when this is happening at a port level and what you're seeing, who's taking the lead role? Is it different entities in different ports, or is it generally the port authority, or who becomes the leader of this?
Yeah, well, here it's at the Port of Los Angeles, it's the port. It's the port who took the lead in developing that platform. In the beginning, it was with General Electric, and now it's with Wabtec. So it's a partnership between the port and Wabtec to develop that platform.
Okay, and these bottlenecks that you mentioned, with ports sitting out in the bay waiting to berth, to unload, what's causing that? Is that something that was happening anyway, or is it related to COVID, or what's behind that?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I don't think we had the congestion issues prior to COVID, or every now and then we would get a little bit of a backup for one reason or another, but systemically, I don't think we had those challenges as much as we did after COVID. And I think what happened with COVID is that, the consumer purchases changed. We went from buying certain, one part. I know that, clothing, a lot of things that stopped being purchased, but then other things kind of took its place. We started buying home improvement. We started buying exercise equipment. Certainly PPE all of a sudden started getting shipped. So then you had things in warehouses that were no longer being sold and new things coming in. So the mix of cargo changed. You had the Chinese warehouses, or excuse me, Chinese manufacturing shut down for quite a while. But then Chinese manufacturing geared up again, but the rest of the world wasn't up to speed yet. So then you had a mix of more containers coming out of China, but a bunch of empties. I know we have empty containers everywhere in Southern California. We can't get rid of them fast enough, but no one likes to ship air. So that they have resorted to having to send empty ships to Southern California to just pick up containers.
Mm-hmm.
So then it just compounds. We have 700 or 800 longshoremen that are out with the longshore labor that are out with either sick or quarantined. Same thing with truckers. So then you've got the truckers out, so you can't move that cargo. I've even heard that the railroads, you can't get rail cars to move the cargo. So then it just becomes this virtual cycle that as soon as one piece breaks, then your supply chain, as they say, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So as soon as one of those links has a little kink in it, then it just starts unraveling.
I know there's another kind of hot political topic in the US over recent years has been this idea of the need for infrastructural investment. And now we have finally, I guess, there is a stimulus package of a size that perhaps can do something about that. Do you see this new package having an impact on ports and other infrastructure, big logistics infrastructure in the US? What do you see coming?
But we hope every single time there's a new package approved, that there's going to be port and port infrastructure funding in there. I think it's what, $2 trillion, $1.9 trillion that the new infrastructure bill. I think one of the silver linings that has come out of the pandemic is the awareness of the supply chain. I think everyone now, understands how important it is to get toilet paper or PPE or whatever it is, on our shelves. So if there's a silver lining for the supply chain is now that awareness of how essential it is. But what I'm hearing is that there could be some initiatives to try to take away some of that money that would go into infrastructure and siphon that off a little bit for green energy, climate change, and some other non-infrastructure expenses. But that's kind of that. We'll have to wait and see what happens, with that. But I do want to say that the U.S. I was just reading from Goldman Sachs that the U.S. is 38th, ranked 38th in the world for our infrastructure. And the American Society of Civil Engineers, the ASCE, just came out with their infrastructure report last week that gave us a C. So I think that's gone up a tiny bit because it used to be a D, but certainly not where we want to be. So our highways, our seaports, airports, they're all, certain our bridges, that certainly is all lacking in infrastructure development. So one of the things I want to mention while we're talking about infrastructure is that this is just a recent development. February 24th, President Biden announced an executive order on America's supply chain. And he's looking at putting together a committee that will give our supply chain a complete assessment. So I'm looking forward to what's going to happen. Who's going to be appointed to that? What are going to be the results? And if that will have any impact on our infrastructure bill, will they have influence on that to be able to say, we need that money to go into our port, seaport, supply chain infrastructure.
Yeah, it's interesting to see supply chain in the mouths of politicians, reporters, and TV presenters. Up until maybe a couple of years ago, it was the kind of what the hell is that? But now, I guess we as supply chain professionals are happy that that's happening. Yeah. Might just turn to Antonio. So
can I just add one more little piece?
Yeah, sure.
Patrick, before, if I can just wrap this up very quickly. I've been going back and forth to Washington, D.C. Since the late 90s, meeting at least once or twice a year with our elected officials and talking about how important our port infrastructure is to our economy. And many years ago, and I know things haven't changed, I say many years ago, this is probably 10, 12 years ago, there was a study done here in Southern California that shows that cargo and goods from the ports of LA and Long Beach go to every single congressional district within the United States. So we would take that information back to our elected officials to let them know how important this is to every single Congress member. Every single Congress member is either receiving goods or sending goods from the most remote parts of the US. They are getting goods from the ports of LA and Long Beach. So it's critical that they support investment in our port infrastructure.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the United Kingdom, across the water from us here, their transport secretary a couple of years back during the Brexit negotiations, the gentleman paid a visit to Dover Port, which is the largest roll-on, roll-off ferry port in the United Kingdom. And there's something like, I don't know the figure, 14,000 trucks go through it every day. And he came back and he said, "Oh, I never realized how important Dover was to the United Kingdom economy." So there you have it. The penny had finally dropped. So Antonio, for you, because it's interesting, you are in Croatia, and Croatia is a member of the European Union. It's one of the more recent countries to join the European Union. I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 10 years, maybe a bit more, is it?
2013.
Okay, 2013, so not quite 10 years. So, and with this kind of reconfiguring of supply chains or nearshoring, Croatia potentially could be one of the beneficiaries of receiving stuff that's brought back, say, from Asia or other parts of the world to Europe, but maybe not home to Germany, maybe to Croatia. So, are you seeing any evidence of that?
Yeah, that's what business people here and politicians also here in Croatia hope and expect what will come of it in the future, in the near future. But there are some other movements and restructuring in the supply chain. For example, there is in recent years, when there was a boom of economy in whole world and in Europe also, then there was a lack of workforce in West Europe, for example, in Germany, and these Balkan countries used to serve as a basin or pool for
like a reservoir of labor,
of workforce for these countries. And now there is it could be a problem if there will be some nearshoring in Croatia or these neighboring countries. There will be lack of workers in this region. So it could go either side, but this pandemic had this beneficence for Croatia and this region, that people came back, and there is no pressure of this demand for workforce, because you couldn't find, for example, when you speak of logistics, you couldn't find. We don't speak about drivers. We know that there were no drivers in the world, but also warehouse workers. You couldn't find people that could that wanted to work in warehouse, and there was a rise of wages also. So there is a cost pressure on this segment, and the supply chains are not structured like that you can rise costs in short period of time, and now on the other hand, we see that we preached for years about lean, about optimization, cost cutting, and everything. And now with pandemic and with this stress and shocks in supply chains, as Elizabeth or somebody spoke about it, that you spoke about these Indian suppliers, and you at once don't have enough supplies, or I mean don't have enough inventories, and we said, okay, you have to optimize these inventories in order to to have lean supply chain and everything. So there are a lot of things that are going on, and but I think that the main things will stay. Cost optimization definitely, with these pressures now and then, and redundant resources that we need. Then there is actually what we spoke today more about this relationship. So if you see, I have one research here that I wrote, that I read a few years ago, and it said that in a few years, or 2020 and forward, there will be actually a lot of activities going on by CPOs that are in relation with cost cutting and relationship management, because the relations will diversify, and there is more and more supplier customer relationships, no matter that, whether this is in Far East or regionally, you have to have this relationship. So this is actually my view of this restructuring. There are a lot of factors and a lot of elements that are changing, and it is impossible to predict anything. Yeah.
I guess one of the key supply chain relationships that I see a lot, because I deal a lot with manufacturing companies and distribution companies, is with logistics service providers for warehousing and for logistics. And that again is a kind of a debate that goes one way and the other, and the quality of the relationship sometimes isn't what it ought to be. But I have this view that there's a lot of potential for manufacturers and distributors in developing quality supply chain relationships with warehousing and transport providers, because this conundrum of how do I balance efficiency and resilience against capacity and other challenges that I have. So at the moment, I'm working on a project with a pharmaceutical manufacturer, quite large, based here, manufacturing for worldwide or EMEA distribution from here. And one of the challenges they have is that in order to support their business into the future, they're either going to have to invest many millions of dollars or euros in this case in building warehouse infrastructure themselves to support their business, regardless of any inventory optimization measures they bring into place, or they're going to have to develop some sort of a quality working relationship that they haven't really had before with warehousing and transport logistics service providers. And that's kind of a new world for them and a little bit daunting. Art, what do you see? What's your view on this kind of critical relationship between manufacturers, distributors on the one hand, and the logistics service providers in transport and warehousing on the other?
I feel it's absolutely required, because they're experts, they're subject matter experts in the field, and it's all about reducing the total cost of ownership. And if you try to build that infrastructure yourself, you're going to spend decades to try to get the expertise that they have, and you'll probably never catch up to them. So that's back to what we were talking about from a strategic supplier standpoint. You have to integrate with somebody like that. And you start thinking about it from the things you gain. Some notes from hearing different people talk that I was making. As you integrate with somebody like that, you reduce your overhead cost. You're not putting that burden on you. And then you start getting into the depth and breadth of their knowledge. How many years would it take you to build that depth and breadth? Decades. Then just the less bureaucracy. You're not trying to run it through your business. You have them you go to, can you fix this? Yes, we have it. Let's go for it. And it comes down to the total cost of ownership. I keep harping on that behind the scenes. We forget about the total cost of ownership. And you think about a logistics provider. ideally we want to ship in a increment of, or a unit of one. And whenever you bring that up, you see a transportation person in the back of their hair bristles. And I always tell them, I go, you haven't changed the weight of anything you're shipping across the entire year. You're shipping the same volume, the same weight. The idea is just shipping in a unit of one. And you get expertise like this, they can help you achieve goals of that nature, to where you're not just looking at the incremental cost accounting measures, you're looking at the total cost of ownership. So absolutely, you have to integrate and build a partnership with a third-party warehousing or a third-party logistics provider. It's a must.
It's an area where there is some interesting innovation going on at the moment, because traditionally you would either build it yourself, as we said, or you would come to an arrangement with a logistics service provider. And if your requirement is large, that logistics service provider will be looking for some sort of commitment from you, because they have to in turn commit to some sort of infrastructure, whether they lease it or whether they have it built or so on. So they'll be looking for contracts that are longer term. And I guess some manufacturers and distributors will be reluctant to maybe to feel trapped, or not to have options. So what has emerged, a little bit like what has happened in the hotels business, these platform businesses. So we're all familiar with Airbnb, whereby it's a platform. They don't own the hotels, but you come as a consumer on the platform. You can see all of these hotels and you choose where you want to stay, and the transaction is done on the platform. The platform takes a percentage and so on. So we've started to see this emerge in warehousing and in transport. There's a couple of examples I've become aware of. One is in the US, and it's only available, as far as I know, in the US and Canada so far. And it's a company called flexe.com. That's FLEXE.com. And what they say they provide is warehousing on demand. So imagine if you are a distributor and you're located in one part of the US and you'd be interested in testing the market in another part of the US, but it would be wouldn't be feasible for you to set up an operation there, or to commit to a logistics service provider there. You can go to the platform, to Flex, and they have arrangements with a multitude of logistics service providers who in this model fulfill the role of the hotels, and they can provide you with storage, pick, pack, delivery service in different parts of the country. So you can test markets, and if they work, you stay and you grow, and if they don't work, you shut down and you go somewhere else. And they have built onto that model. They have built on long-term contracts as well. So it's not just for startups, and it's not just for testing. And they have also long-term arrangements going on. And I've been speaking to them, and they will be coming to Europe in time, I think. I hope they will. And another one similar, but this time for transport, is a German platform called Sender, SENNDER. And these guys provide access to 10,000 heavy goods vehicles that ply the routes of Europe, but again as a platform. So that's interesting innovation that's kind of in its early days, that's coming through in the logistics service provision space, and it's quite interesting. Any other comments or observations on that before we kind of start to wrap up? We're kind of getting to 5 minutes to the top of the hour now. So just on that 3PL world, any other things to add or comment?
Just a thought. There's different contract manufacturers around the country, around the world, and they went through a major consolidation in the 90s and the first two parts of the 2000s. And you just wonder, through this disruption you're seeing in warehousing, will there be a disruption to that, to where you will get something in the manufacturing sector in the same breath? And it's kind of exciting to watch for. I haven't seen it yet, but I smell it coming.
Yeah, okay. I might just ask each of you then to, as we wrap up, what would you say is, if you were to pick one, the major challenge that companies should be looking at to resolve? And what would be your best advice and tips, one or two tips So maybe I'll start with Elizabeth.
I was hoping you would not pick me first, Patrick, but that's all right.
I'm trying to keep it in sequence rather than popping back to the same.
The good news is, for the sake of time, I can't go very long. Gosh, there's so many good things that came out of this. I have to just go back to, one of the things that I started talking about first, and that is technology, sharing information, get on a platform where you can share information with, and get that visibility in to your supply chain, and not be afraid of it, not be afraid of sharing the information or the proprietary, because it is all protected. But with that, it also said is also make sure that all of your security protocols are in place as well, and don't skimp on security for your data, but get on those data sharing platforms, get that visibility into your supply chain.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. And Art, top challenge and one or two top tips.
Hiring professionalism within the supply chain, getting top tier professionals the best you can afford, and then stretching some. The challenges are understanding the total cost of ownership and carrying that forward through the board to get away from cost or incremental accounting and look at the total cost of ownership on your product. That's the biggest challenge.
Okay, Antonio.
Top challenge for me is resilience versus efficiency, because I went through this how to say time where I was all about efficiency, yeah? And then there was a shock. There was this pandemic where there was the winners were those that were resilient in the way that they have some redundant resources. So I think this is a challenge. And tips with the reference to the topic of this panel. I think that professionals in supply chain management need to learn some soft skills, because the supply chain management logistics is hardcore business, and the people in this segment are very tough. And now you have to deal with other companies, with other people, suppliers, 3PLs, and you have to know how to deal with different kind of relationships, with different kind of people. So I think that the professionals in supply chain need to learn these new skills. And another tip is a process optimization. So okay, I am a gadget freak and all about technology, but in a sense of business of supply chain of logistics, I am cautious about automatization, because the automatization is not a remedy for all, or silver bullet, or how you want to call it. It helps, but you have to dose it very carefully and very precise. So also, as Art mentioned on the beginning, when there is a rise of costs in supply chain, you have to compensate somehow, and you can compensate with process optimization, so that you do right things, not only things in the right way.
Okay, and then for me, I would say the big challenge is going to be taking decisions in a strategic sense. and that we need to take decisions from a place of uncertainty. And we need to avoid the danger of paralysis by analysis, so that our narrative accounts of the future and where we're going with our business is as important, maybe more important than projections or forecasts that we know are wrong. And it's kind of that we need almost courage and the conviction to be able to take decisions in the face of uncertainty in this kind of world that we're in at the moment. So that kind of brings us to a close. You'll see that I have written my email address. All of the attendees can see my email address there. If you would like this panel to come and sit with you for free in an Ask the Panel type arrangement for 30, 60 minutes, just send me an email. The first 3 that do that, we'll set up a meeting between this group and yourself, and we'll help you with whatever supply chain challenges you are looking at. So that's a free offer that the guys have kindly made. So thank you to Antonio from Zagreb, Elizabeth from Los Angeles, Arthur from Miami, and me here from Dublin in Ireland, and Lisa there, who's been hovering in the background, also in California. Thank you, and have a great day, and thanks for your attention. All the best. Bye-bye.